For those of you who've been part of the Temple Sholom community for a while, you might have already heard this story before. But since it's a new year, with a very intense political climate, I think it's worth revisiting. One day, my neighbor Jacob and I were talking. We both have 2 young daughters and live in the same cul-de-sac. And that's where our similarities stop. Our neighbors make jokes about it. Uh-oh, Miriam and Jacob are talking. There's this assumption that what we must be saying goes something like, don't get me started on immigration, healthcare, or elected officials, whatever the current political hot-button issue is, because there's a 99% chance that we vehemently disagree with one another's stance. They aren't wrong, but neither is that a true depiction of our friendship. In this particular conversation, we were talking about firearms. Jacob called me out. I bet you haven't even picked up a gun, Miriam. And he was right. I never had. Laughing because he was right and I was wrong, he said, well, I'd love to take you to the range sometime. Probably betting on me never taking him up on it. So I said, how's tomorrow? We drove the half hour out to a private range, each of us making slightly nervous small talk, both of us a little surprised that we were actually doing this together. I learned so much that day. Not just how to hold and shoot a gun, but about trigger locks and responsible gun ownership, about policies around background checks, all kinds of stuff that I thought I understood, but I didn't. Each time something new would come up, I'd feel this surge inside me like, oh my God, I hate guns, which I would then have to quell by saying to myself, I'm safe. And in this moment, my need for curiosity is stronger than my need to be right. During our safety check, I told Jacob about how my childhood friend Zachary, who lived just 2 doors down from me when I was little, was playing one day with another neighbor at his house where there was an unlocked gun. The boys were playing, and Zachary was shot and killed at the age of 7. For me, Zachary has always been the face of gun safety. He's why I never wanted to touch one and why I'm so uncomfortable even talking about guns. Jacob also shared from his own life experience, talking of a tragic time when people tried to break into his home when he was just a small child. Tragically, help came to their defense too late to make any difference. It led him to believe that home and family protection would always fall first on his shoulders. Our stories had great impact on our individual political stances, but both of us benefited from learning from the other. 3 hours later, as we're driving home, Jacob asked me what I believe now, and I thought for a moment before saying, I still have the same opinions, but now I know so much more. Thank you, Jacob. And he laughed and said, me too. What went right in our interaction is that we listened for the reason behind one another's opinions. We unpacked our stories that led to our opposing viewpoints. And even though both of our opinions stayed the same, our connection with one another was now deeper and has broadened both of our interpretations of the world. This is a small example of choosing compassion rather than rightness. Unfortunately, it's not an everyday thing. And frankly, the only reason we're even at the range is because I wanted to prove Jacob wrong about his assumptions about me. Often, I choose being right because it feels good and takes less energy. Right gives us a very limited view. All of our opinions are informed by circumstance, and unless we've lived someone else's life, we can never fully understand why someone believes the way he does. When our self-worth and upward mobility depends so much on being right, it erodes our natural instincts to learn and experiment. We are conditioned to fight for our piece of the pie, wired to competitively advance on the presumption of being right. Because if we aren't right, then we are wrong. And in this world where right is the end-all be-all of success, being wrong can lead us to feel lessened, humiliated, and in some cases, being wrong upsets our entire worldview. We are rooted in systems, political, social, and educational, that reward rightness, calling it steadfast character. And if you do change your mind or apologize and say, I was wrong, and now I believe, then we are frequently skeptical. Are you changing your mind because of societal pressure, or for more votes, or to appease donors, or because you have actually changed? Take, for example, Senator Rob Portman, who for the majority of his career held a staunch line opposing gay marriage. He believed that marriage was only between a man and a woman, citing his faith and the Bible as his proof text, until the day his son came out as gay, whereupon Senator Portman changed his mind. Senator Portman explained his change in stance on same-sex marriage because his son opened his eyes. In Senator Portman's announcement about the change of opinion, he said, "The overriding message of love and compassion that I take from the Bible, and certainly the Golden Rule, and the fact that I believe we are all created by our Maker, has all influenced me in my change on this issue." The core reason that made Senator Portman hold his original position against same-sex marriage is the exact same reason that made him change his opinion. His faith didn't falter, and the Bible didn't change, but his heart as a person of faith was open to the continuous ongoing effects of that faith on his person. Some might be dismissive of Senator Portman. Oh, sure, you change now once it affects you and your children. But truly, that's the only way any of us change, when it comes for us, or when we understand that we have something to lose, or when our eyes are opened by someone in our lives that we respect and love. That's how we change. A change of opinion or behavior rarely comes from a logical argument. It most often comes from a new experience and an open heart. There's so much pressure not to change our opinions. Portman paid a political price for changing his mind and going against the general opinion of his party. It worked for him because his core value was based in his faith rather than on outside factors. I think it's pretty rare for a politician to admit that they have changed, or even for voters to admit that they might have changed their mind about their party or specific policies. Much more common is to hold the party line regardless of our flexible personal opinions. This right versus wrong duality serves us only in very specific instances, and when it is applied interrelationally, the cost to us is huge. Eckhart Tolle describes the need to be right as a form of violence. At its mildest, it's inflexibility. At its height, it manifests as dominance. The compulsion to inflict our opinions of the world on another person originates in fear. Its opposites are humility and compassion. It's one thing to like being right, and it's another thing to need to be right. Which one are you? That's easy. When's the last time you apologized? If we cannot take blame, then we cannot be held accountable. And if we can abdicate our responsibility for the situation we participate in, we become emotionally unreachable. An inability to regret or back down from an opinion, no matter what side of right and wrong you are on, is a serious issue, making us at risk in our workplaces, in our relationships. There are ways to hear someone else's opinion without destroying theirs. You don't have to believe it their way, and they can contradict what you believe. No doubt in this heated election season in our battleground tri-state area, someone you love will say something you think is wrong or you disagree with. And instead of responding from a guttural space, try responding with the compassionate phrase, "That's a perspective I haven't considered." Now, if it's really inhumane, you can't even get out of, "I understand where you're coming from," you can just acknowledge you disagree without launching into a full-blown argument to assault. We don't have to accept the unacceptable, but we do have to accept reality that there will always be contradictory opinions to our own. Thank goodness. Look, none of us is going to become the Dalai Lama in one day, but we don't need to contribute to the device's obsession with rightness in our culture. We can learn so much from people who see the world differently than we do. I'm going to tell you a story about my family in a trip that we took to Montana a few years ago visiting a friend. We went to the National Bison Range, and if you haven't been there, you should totally go. It's really amazing. It felt like a national safari. Like we went in our Subaru and stood through the moonroof so we could see the bison. And we just landed it perfectly. We could see all these bison going through it, and my 2-year-old was fast asleep the entire time. The entire time as we're going through this magical place. And finally, we roll up on the side, and there's this bison with her babies, and they're all sitting there, and it's so perfect. And so we wake up my little girl, and we're like, hey, look. And she rubs her little eyes, and she looks out, and she goes, "Ah, penguin!" Okay, it wasn't a penguin. But where was she coming through? If we had said, "That's not a penguin, that's a bison," would it have made anything different to change her mind? Would the world be better? Because the only thing that I think would be better was really just to rejoice in her delight. Her view of what she sees is not black and white, and it's nuance pertaining to her person. And now the strange and wonderful in our family has a name, and it's Penguin. After all, there's a time for everything. A time for old ways of thinking and a time for new ways of thinking. A time for party politics and a time for bipartisanship. A time for Jacob's story and a time for mine. A time for penguins and a time for bison. Before we continue with our service in the spirit of the Jewish high holiday season, I'd like to take a brief moment to ask you to do 3 things. 1, register to vote. If you've already done that, wonderful. Now, request an absentee ballot. Make phone calls for a campaign that you care about, or volunteer to be a poll worker if you are physically able. This election season needs people who are comfortable showing up with their values at the polls. Don't dismiss your own power to make a difference. 2, consider a moment this year where you acted from a place of rightness instead of righteousness. Is there a way you can connect with that person that you disagreed with? Is there healing to be had in the humility of knowing that you can change your mind, or at least change the way that you share your mind? This is part of the sacred Jewish obligation of teshuvah, of turning, of changing, realigning with our best and most righteous selves. And 3, finally, if you're part of the Cincinnati Temple Sholom community, I just want to thank you for your generous gifts of talent, time, and finances to make all of this possible. And if you're not part of our community but would like to learn more about us or partner with us financially so that we can continue making and creating and sharing programs like this, please find us through our website or social media accounts. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, whatever city you live in, whether you are a Jew or a seeker, we hope that you know you're not alone and that we welcome you.